My name is Brendan Rooney. I was the Transport Bill Manager within the Scottish Government, the project which won Team of the Year in the 2020 CIHT Awards. Firstly, I suppose just to say, it was very welcome to see a piece of legislation being recognised in these awards, which can traditionally be more aligned with shovel-ready type projects such as infrastructure or road building. So it was really quite heartening to see a project of this nature being recognised. The Transport Bill, which became the Transport Act, was the first major piece of transport legislation to go through the Scottish Parliament in 14 years, and was a very broad project encompassing measures such as low emission zones, quite radical reform of bus service delivery options in Scotland, smart ticketing, pavement and double parking prohibitions, workplace parking levy provisions, and a range of other matters. So it was a project that had a very wide remit, but also had a terrible amount of legal and technical complexity underpinning it. So we were always aware that it would be a challenge as a project, and given the very large number of colleagues involved, that team working would have been a key point for us to make sure that we kept things on track and that we had provisions that were ready for parliamentary introduction, would stand up to parliamentary scrutiny, but also that could garner support from across the political spectrum to ensure that the legislation actually gained royal assent and came into effect. So in that multidisciplinary environment, we really had policy expertise, legal advisors and technical expertise, but also encompassing the realities of political and parliamentary handling. So having a clear project plan and critical pathway towards key milestones was really one of the critical factors we had to look at early on. But in terms of teamwork, I think also just ensuring we had collaboration, understanding of different people's positions, that we would have a very high number of opinions involved in this, but that these would need to coalesce into fruitful and concrete decisions in often rather short and pressured timeframes. So to do that, really, I think our main reflection was having an open forum for debate, bringing colleagues together in a good-natured manner, allowing for a challenge function, which means there are no silly questions. People are able to air what they think in a fairly open forum, but also having clear sign-off and governance procedures that would mean when we did need critical decisions to be made, we had that pathway open and we knew how to do that. And also having a bit of flexibility within that. It was at times quite a pressured environment with quite contentious decisions needing to be made. But certainly that bringing colleagues together and ensuring that there was a chance to air and discuss and debate views before key decisions were made, I think was really one of the elements that made it such a success.
The Transport Scotland Bill provided the opportunity to create world-leading environmental legislation on the topic of low emission zones. Scottish ministers committed to the introduction of low emission zones in Scotland's 4 major cities in order to address the issue of pollution from transport. We reviewed existing LEZ legislation in Europe, and that created the spine of topics that ultimately led to the production of low emission zone elements within the bill. We focused on topics such as emission standards, penalty rates, enforcement, appeals and examinations to make sure that we had legislation that would allow LEZs to work in practice. The timetable for the production of the legislation was relentless. There was no let up in the tasks that had to be produced, and we had to follow a critical path timetable. So it really was unlike any project that I've worked on in my career. But I have to say, we created a team that worked in collaboration between environmentalists, lawyers, the bill team and the Cabinet Secretary together in a way that created legislation that I think we can be proud of. It was a complicated, multifaceted bill that we had to ensure the issues that we were focusing on also had crossover to other elements within the bill, such as parking, where they, like us, were interested in issues such as penalties and the appeals process. There are several personal highlights that stick out in the production of the LEZ legislation. So firstly, we had to build a new team within Transport Scotland on air quality within the first 6 months of the bill being produced, and that is no small feat in itself. Secondly, we had to support the Cabinet Secretary at stage 2 of the Transport Infrastructure and Connectivity Committee, where there was an examination of the legislation on an almost line-by-line basis by MSPs on that committee. The Cabinet Secretary had to defend proposals, and officials we had to provide that support on the day and the weeks leading up to it. And thirdly, an issue that sticks in my mind was the production of purpose and effect notes for government and non-government amendments. These happened at stage 2 and 3 of the parliamentary process, and they had to be produced at extremely high speed over the period of 2 to 3 days, with over 80 amendments on low emission zones being handled at stage 2 alone. So all in all, that required detailed discussion between environmentalists, lawyers and the bill team to allow the deliverables to be met. I think it's fair to say that we did rise to the challenge, and as a team across multiple professions, we were able to succeed and result in an output that I think throughout our careers we'll look back on and think we did a good job there.
Hi, my name is Alice and I was also a member of the now award-winning team that took the Transport Bill Now Act through the Scottish Parliament last year. You've already heard a little bit about the background and also of the policy area of low emission zones, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the parliamentary process and how we also collaborated as a team to pass this legislation. The parliamentary process in Scotland for legislation has 3 different stages, and at each stage MSPs scrutinise the legislation and vote on it. So at stage 1, a committee report is written and the general principles of the bill are either agreed or disagreed. If they're agreed, the bill moves to stage 2, where a committee assesses different amendments to the bill and votes on them. At stage 3, further amendments are considered and then the whole bill is voted on. The Transport Bill actually received over 400 different amendments, which I think is one of the highest numbers a bill in Scotland has ever received. Each amendment has to have a purpose and effect note drafted to explain what it would do to the legislation and provide advice to ministers when they're voting on them. As we had over 400, we obviously had our work cut out, especially given that parliamentary timescales are fixed and you have to stick with them. So to achieve the passing of the legislation and drafting all the purpose and effect notes, we really had to collaborate as a team. And to do this, we set up different channels of communication. So we had a project board fairly often, and we also had training sessions. We had informal meetups, and we just made sure there was processes in place for people to follow. So for instance, we had an amendment tracker to make sure we kept on top of all those amendments and all the relevant information. We also had to support the Cabinet Secretary throughout the process. So while our policy leads would know the detail of their individual policies, he had to really be on top of the whole complex legislation. So to do this, we made sure we provided frequent briefings, we also attended meetings to support him, and we also sat with him in committee and in the main chamber to provide advice if required. This process for me has really been a highlight and I've absolutely loved it. It's so exciting to work in the heart of Parliament and be in the middle of all the political excitement and drama that goes on, as well as being part of a project that has real, genuine, tangible outcomes. And as Stephen and Brendan both said, we're sure we'll look back on this in years to come and think what an amazing job this team did. So thank you very much for nominating and also awarding us with this award. It's been a great experience. Thank you.